March 6, 1945, 3:47 p.m., Cologne Cathedral Square, Germany. The gunner's periscope shattered into a spiderweb of cracks as Feldwebel Karl Hoffmann pressed his eye against it, straining to identify the unfamiliar silhouette emerging from the rubble-strewn street. For 3 years, he had memorized every American tank profile with obsessive precision. The high-riding Sherman with its 75mm pop gun, the Stuart light tanks that Tiger crews called toy Panzers, even the rare jumbo Shermans with their extra armor that still couldn't penetrate a Tiger's frontal plate beyond 500 meters. But this was something else entirely. "Das ist keine Sherman," he whispered into the intercom, his voice carrying a tremor that his crew had never heard before. "That's not a Sherman." Before we dive deeper into this forgotten battlefield moment, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Through the cracked optics, he could see the massive gun barrel, longer, thicker than any American tank gun he'd encountered. The hull sat lower, more angular, with sloped armor that looked cast rather than welded. The turret was enormous, almost disproportionate to the hull, like someone had mounted a heavy anti-aircraft gun on a tank chassis. His mind raced through recognition charts, training silhouettes, intelligence briefings. Nothing matched. In exactly 18 seconds, Karl Hoffmann and his crew would become among the first German tank crews in history to discover that the Americans had finally built something that could kill them at any range, from any angle. The Panther tank, commanded by Wilhelm Bartelborth of Panzer, Brigade 106, had already learned this lesson 3 minutes earlier. Its 5-man crew never got to report what killed them. The M26 Pershing's 90mm M3 gun spoke first. The armor-piercing round traveled at 853 meters per second, crossing the 120 meters between the two tanks in less time than it took Hoffmann to blink. The projectile struck the Panther's frontal armor at the turret face. The 100mm armor plate, which had deflected dozens of Sherman rounds in France and Belgium, split under the impact like paper. The 90mm shell, still carrying tremendous kinetic energy, continued through the crew compartment before detonating. The mathematics of Allied victory were being written not in battle plans, but in production statistics and battlefield encounters that would shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The story of German tank superiority had been written in steel and blood since the Tiger first rumbled into combat at Leningrad in August 1942. For 2.5 years, German heavy tank crews had lived inside machines that seemed to violate the fundamental rules of armored warfare. Their 88mm guns could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Their armor, 100mm thick on the front hull and 120mm on the turret, made them virtually immune to standard Allied tank guns at normal combat ranges. The Tiger WWII weighed 57 tons, powered by a Maybach HL230 V12 engine producing 700 horsepower. Its transmission, while complex and prone to breakdowns, allowed the massive tank to achieve surprising tactical mobility. The gun, derived from the famous 88mm Flak gun, could fire armor-piercing rounds at velocities exceeding 800 meters per second. German crews quickly learned that proper ammunition selection was crucial. The Pezi GR39 tungsten core round could penetrate 165mm of armor at 500 meters, while the standard Pezi GR40 could manage 120mm at the same range. The psychological effect was as powerful as the mechanical advantage. Veterans of Schwer Panzerabteilung 506 described the feeling of invincibility that came with operating Tigers. Oberscharführer Klaus Döring, who commanded Tiger 131 during the Tunisian campaign, later recalled, "We felt like gods of war. When we saw Allied tanks approaching, we didn't fear for our lives. We counted the kills we were about to make." The mathematics were indeed compelling. The American M4 Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could only penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor at ranges under 100 meters, and only then with special ammunition and perfect angles. The British 6-pounder and 17-pounder guns fared little better at standard combat ranges. Meanwhile, the Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 could punch through a Sherman's frontal armor at 2,000 meters. German crews developed sophisticated tactics to exploit this advantage. They would position their Tigers at maximum range, using superior optics, like the TZF-9BA telescopic sight, to acquire targets before Allied crews could even identify the German positions. The standard engagement procedure called for targeting the most dangerous threat first, usually tank destroyers, then systematically destroying remaining armor from long range. By December 1944, German tank crews had developed standard tactics that exploited this technological superiority with ruthless efficiency. They would position their Tigers and King Tigers at maximum range, using their superior optics and guns to destroy Allied tanks before they could close to threatening distances. A single Tiger could and often did hold up entire Allied advances for hours or days. The most famous example occurred at Villers-Bocage in June 1944, when SS Oberscharführer Michael Wittmann's single Tiger destroyed 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 other vehicles in less than 15 minutes. Wittmann's Tiger, numbered 205, approached the British column from concealment and systematically destroyed vehicles from front to rear, trapping the entire formation. Though Wittmann himself would die in August 1944, months before the Pershing arrived, this demonstration of superiority created a profound psychological advantage that extended beyond the battlefield. The German training system reinforced this technological confidence. Tank schools like the one at Putlos taught crews that proper positioning and gunnery could overcome any numerical disadvantage. Instructors used captured Allied tanks for live fire demonstrations, showing students how easily their guns could penetrate Sherman armor, while Allied rounds bounced harmlessly off Tiger plates. Allied tank crews developed Tiger fever, often mistaking any German tank for a Tiger and reporting far more Tiger encounters than actually occurred. Intelligence reports from Normandy show Allied units reporting Tigers in sectors where only Panzer IVs operated. This psychological impact multiplied the effectiveness of the relatively few Tigers actually in service. Germany produced only 1,347 Tiger IS during the entire war. Meanwhile, German heavy tank crews developed an almost mystical belief in their invulnerability, painting kill rings on their gun barrels like fighter aces. Crews competed for the highest scores, with aces like Kurt Knispel, 168 confirmed kills, and Otto Karius, 150-plus kills, becoming legends within the Panzerwaffe. These men weren't just tank commanders, they were symbols of German technological superiority made manifest. But unknown to these confident crews, 8,000 kilometers away in the Detroit tank arsenal, American engineers had been working since September 1942 on a project designated T-26. They were building something that would shatter the myth of German tank invulnerability forever. The journey to the M26 Pershing began with a bitter realization during the North African campaign. American tank design had fallen dangerously behind European developments. The M4 Sherman, which formed the backbone of American armored forces, had been designed in 1941 when the most dangerous German tank was the Panzer IV, with its short 75mm gun. By the time Shermans faced Tigers in Italy and Normandy, they were outclassed in every category that mattered: armor, firepower, and effective range. The wake-up call came from multiple sources. General Omar Bradley's after-action reports from Tunisia were particularly damning. "Our tanks are death traps. We're sending boys to fight men with superior weapons." British intelligence shared detailed analysis of captured Tiger tanks, revealing armor thicknesses that made Sherman guns ineffective at normal combat ranges. Most critically, combat reports showed German tanks engaging American armor at ranges where return fire was impossible. The Pershing development program represented a crash effort involving 14 major contractors, 300 subcontractors, and over 50,000 workers across 22 states. The project's scope was staggering. Not just designing a new tank, but creating entirely new production techniques, training programs, and supply chains. The Army's Ordnance Department established development centers at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Detroit Arsenal, and Fort Knox, each working on different aspects of the new heavy tank. Fisher Body Division of General Motors, which had been producing Sherman tanks at its Grand Blanc Arsenal in Michigan, received orders to immediately retool for the new heavy tank. The changes were revolutionary. New casting techniques for the turret required furnaces capable of melting 15 tons of steel at temperatures exceeding 1,600 degrees Celsius. The turret casting alone weighed 8.5 tons, and required precision machining that pushed American manufacturing capabilities to their limits. The transmission system presented unique challenges. German tanks used complex manual transmissions that required extensive crew training but offered precise control. American engineers chose a different approach, the Ford GAF automatic transmission that could be operated by minimally trained crews while offering comparable performance. This decision reflected fundamental differences in American and German military philosophy. Americans prioritized ease of operation and maintenance over theoretical maximum performance. The 90mm M3 gun was a marvel of American engineering that deserves detailed examination. Developed from the successful 90mm anti-aircraft gun, it required extensive modifications for tank use. The barrel length was increased to 53 calibers, 4.77 meters, giving it superior ballistic performance to the German 88mm K-36. The gun fired a 24-pound armor-piercing round at velocities exceeding 2,800 feet per second. Ammunition development paralleled gun design. The standard M82 APC, armor-piercing capped, round could penetrate 119 millimeters of armor at 500 yards, sufficient to defeat Tiger I frontal armor at normal combat ranges. The newer T-30E-16 HVAP round with its tungsten carbide core could penetrate 221 millimeters at the same range, enough to threaten even the mighty King Tiger's 150mm frontal plate. The development was shrouded in unprecedented secrecy that went far beyond normal military classification. Workers at the Fisher tank arsenal were told they were building an improved Sherman variant. Components were manufactured in separate facilities across the country to prevent anyone from understanding the complete design. Critical parts like the gun mantle and turret casting were produced at different plants, then assembled only at the final production facility. Security measures included false shipping documents, dummy corporate names, and even fake employee identification cards. Workers signed agreements under penalty of court-martial not to discuss their work. The program used code names like T-26 and heavy maintenance vehicle in all documentation. Even high-ranking officers outside the program were told the tanks were Sherman variants with upgraded armor. January 15, 1945, New York port of embarkation. Under cover of darkness and heavy security that rivaled atomic weapons programs, the first 20 M26 Pershings were loaded onto ships bound for Europe. Each tank was wrapped in waterproof covering and labeled with false shipping codes, identifying them as M4A3E8 Special Configuration tanks. The deception was complete. Even the ship's manifest listed them as standard Sherman variants. The crews selected to operate these revolutionary machines had been training in isolation at Fort Knox since November 1944. These weren't typical tank crews, but hand-picked veterans with extensive combat experience. Sergeant First Class Robert Early, who would command the famous Eagle 7 Pershing, had already destroyed 6 German tanks in a Sherman. Staff Sergeant Clarence Smoyer, the gunner, was known for his exceptional marksmanship skills. The training program at Fort Knox was unprecedented in its secrecy and intensity. Crews lived in isolated barracks, ate in separate mess halls, and were forbidden contact with other personnel. They studied German armor recognition charts until they could identify tank types from silhouettes at 2,000 meters. More importantly, they practiced engaging German heavy tanks using realistic ranges and scenarios. The crossing took 11 days through U-boat-infested waters of the North Atlantic. The Pershings were positioned in the ship's holds behind rows of regular Shermans, hidden even from most of the ship's crew. Naval intelligence had identified this convoy as a high-priority target due to the unusual cargo manifest, leading to increased destroyer escort and aerial patrols. Tank crews spent the voyage studying detailed German armor specifications and practicing their cover story. If questioned, they were replacement crews for standard Sherman units being rotated from combat. The deception training was so thorough that crew members could discuss Sherman maintenance procedures, ammunition loads, and combat tactics with complete authenticity. The Pershings arrived at Antwerp on January 26, 1945, again under cover of darkness. They were immediately transported by special trains to the 3rd Armored Division's maintenance area near Düren, Germany. The rail cars were covered with tarps and labeled as priority maintenance equipment. Even German spies observing the port could only report standard American tank deliveries. Here, crews conducted final preparations, while Division Commander Major General Maurice Rose personally briefed battalion commanders on the new weapon. Rose, one of the few officers fully briefed on Pershing capabilities, understood the psychological impact these tanks might have. His orders were explicit: avoid unnecessary combat, engage only German heavy tanks, and maintain secrecy about capabilities. February 25, 1945. The first 4 Pershings were assigned to the 3rd Armored Division's push toward the Rhine. They were distributed, 1 per task force, hidden among regular Sherman companies with strict orders to avoid combat unless engaging German heavy tanks. The crews painted them with standard olive drab and added unit markings to make them blend in, though their longer guns and lower profiles made them distinctive to trained eyes. The German intelligence failure was complete and represented one of the war's most significant intelligence disasters. Despite having one of the most effective intelligence services in history, the Wehrmacht had no idea the Pershings existed. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, had extensive networks in the United States monitoring war production. They knew about Sherman production numbers, aircraft development, even atomic research, but the Pershing program had escaped detection entirely. German intelligence had made a fundamental analytical error. They correctly identified American production capacity, but misunderstood American priorities. Intelligence analysts assumed Americans had chosen quantity over quality as a permanent doctrine, unable to conceive that American industry could pivot to producing heavy tanks while maintaining Sherman production. Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin, Chief Intelligence Officer for Army Group West, later wrote, "We knew Americans could build many tanks quickly. We assumed this meant they had accepted inferior quality. The possibility that they might achieve both quantity and quality simultaneously never occurred to us." This assumption was reinforced by captured Sherman specifications and interrogations of American tank crews. German intelligence possessed detailed knowledge of Sherman weaknesses: thin armor, inadequate guns, mechanical reliability problems. They extrapolated from this data that American tank design philosophy was fundamentally flawed. The intelligence failure extended to production monitoring. German agents in America reported on tank factories but focused on Sherman production numbers. The conversion of automobile plants like Fisher Body to tank production was noted but misunderstood. Intelligence reports described Sherman production expansion rather than recognizing the development of entirely new tank types. Signals intelligence also failed to detect the program. German codebreakers, who had achieved remarkable success against Allied communications, found no references to heavy tank development. The security protocols surrounding the Pershing were so complete that even classified communications used code names and euphemisms. Most significantly, German commanders rejected intelligence reports that didn't fit their preconceptions. When scattered reports began arriving in February 1945, describing American tanks with larger guns, intelligence officers dismissed them as observer errors or misidentified tank destroyers. February 26, 1945, near Elsdorf, Germany, marked the first Pershing combat loss, but also the first confirmation that German intelligence had failed catastrophically. The T-26E3, nicknamed Fireball, was knocked out by a Tiger I in a close-range ambush. The Tiger's 88mm round struck the Pershing's gun mantlet, killing the gunner and loader. However, the Pershing was repaired and returned to service on March 7th, a testament to American recovery and maintenance capabilities that German intelligence had also underestimated. The disabled Pershing provided German technical intelligence with their first close examination of American heavy tank design. What they discovered challenged every assumption about American engineering capabilities. The armor quality matched German standards, the gun was more powerful than anticipated, and the overall design showed sophisticated engineering thinking. Over the next week, scattered reports began reaching German headquarters about encounters with an unidentified American tank with a longer gun and heavier armor than the Sherman. A Panther crew from Schwer Panzerabteilung 507 reported being destroyed at 1,800 meters by a single shot from an American vehicle they couldn't identify. Most disturbingly, every report mentioned the same detail: a gun that appeared significantly longer and larger than the standard Sherman 75mm. German intelligence officers faced a disturbing pattern. Multiple independent reports described the same phenomenon: American tanks with capabilities that shouldn't exist. Field commanders demanded answers, but intelligence staffs had no explanations. The reports were too consistent to dismiss, but too incredible to believe. March 6, 1945. The battle at Cologne Cathedral would become the most documented tank duel of World War II, captured on film by Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates. The footage would later serve as proof of American heavy tank superiority, but at the time it documented the moment German tank crews discovered their technological advantage had vanished. The day began with German forces positioning remaining tanks around Cathedral Square in what they believed would be a routine defensive action. Wilhelm Bartelborth, commanding a Panther from Panzer Brigade 106, felt confident despite the American approach. The square's open space gave clear fields of fire up to 800 meters, and their positions behind rubble provided partial hull cover. His crew had destroyed 8 Allied tanks in the previous month, all Shermans engaged at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. At 15:20 hours, Bartelborth spotted movement near the destroyed Geryon Hotel. Through his commander's periscope, he saw what he initially reported as an unusual Sherman variant with an extended gun. The silhouette was wrong, lower, more angular than standard Shermans, but his brain interpreted what it saw through the lens of experience. It had to be a Sherman because Americans didn't build heavy tanks. He ordered his gunner to engage at 300 meters, point-blank range, for a Panther's high-velocity 75mm gun. The L-70 gun had never failed to penetrate Allied armor at this range. Gunner Obergefreiter Hans Weber centered his crosshairs on the American tank's frontal slope and fired. The 75mm armor-piercing round struck the approaching tank's frontal armor at optimal angle and velocity. Instead of the familiar sight of penetration and internal explosion, Weber watched his round ricochet upward in a shower of sparks. The impossible had occurred. His shot had failed to penetrate what appeared to be an American tank. Bartelborth had exactly 3 seconds to process this impossibility before the return shot arrived. Staff Sergeant Robert Early, commanding the Pershing nicknamed Eagle 7, had already acquired the Panther in his gun sight. His gunner, Corporal Clarence Smoyer, had been tracking the German tank for 30 seconds, waiting for clearance to fire. Smoyer centered the crosshairs on the Panther's mantlet, the same targeting technique that had failed countless Sherman crews against German armor. But the Pershing's 90mm M3 gun wasn't bound by Sherman limitations. The armor-piercing round punched through the Panther's turret face as if it were cardboard. The tank burst into flames as ammunition cooked off, the turret lifting slightly from internal pressure before settling back onto the hull. The 5-man crew died instantly, victims of the kinetic energy transfer that German crews had inflicted on Allied tanks for 3 years. The film footage captured by Jim Bates shows what happened next. Another German tank nearby, accounts vary whether it was a Tiger I or another Panther, attempted to engage but was also destroyed by the Pershing with a single frontal shot at 400 meters. The second engagement lasted only seconds, demonstrating that the first kill wasn't lucky shot placement but systematic technological superiority. The engagement at Cologne Cathedral lasted less than 5 minutes, but demonstrated conclusively that American tanks could now match German armor in the one category that mattered most: the ability to kill enemy tanks while surviving return fire. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The destruction of German tanks at Cologne Cathedral, captured on film and witnessed by multiple German observers, triggered an intelligence crisis within the Wehrmacht that reached the highest levels of command. Oberkommando West issued urgent directives demanding all units report immediately any encounters with new American heavy tanks and provide detailed descriptions and capabilities. The responses painted a picture of technological surprise that German commanders struggled to accept. Multiple crews reported American tanks with 90mm class guns and heavy frontal armor destroying Panthers and Tigers at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. The reports were too consistent and detailed to dismiss, yet they challenged fundamental assumptions about American capabilities. General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz, commander of Army Group H, personally reviewed the intelligence reports. His marginal notes reveal the psychological impact. If accurate, this changes everything. Request immediate technical analysis. Similar reactions occurred throughout the German command structure as the implications became clear. German crews began referring to the new American tanks as the long gun Sherman, unable to conceive of an entirely new American heavy tank design. This misunderstanding would persist for weeks, contributing to tactical errors as German crews attempted to engage Pershings using anti-Sherman tactics developed over 3 years of combat. The Panzerwaffe's training infrastructure struggled to respond to intelligence about American heavy tanks. Tank schools like Putlos and Bergen had no information about the new American vehicle. Recognition charts didn't exist, and tactical manuals assumed American tank guns couldn't penetrate German heavy armor frontally. Instructors found themselves teaching doctrine that combat reports suggested was obsolete. Training scenarios had to be revised immediately. Previously, instructors taught that engaging American armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters guaranteed German victory. Now they had to acknowledge that some American tanks might pose threats at maximum engagement ranges. The psychological impact on trainees was significant. The fundamental assumption of technological superiority was being questioned. More critically, veteran crews returning from combat brought first-hand accounts that contradicted everything German intelligence believed about American capabilities. These men had seen Pershings destroy German heavy tanks with single shots at ranges where Sherman guns were ineffective. Their testimony couldn't be dismissed as combat exaggeration or misidentification. By mid-March 1945, roughly 20 Pershings were operational in the European theater, with more arriving weekly through the same secretive deployment process. While this number seems insignificant compared to the thousands of Shermans in service, the psychological impact far exceeded the mathematical ratio. German tank crews, accustomed to engaging Shermans with near impunity, now approached every engagement with uncertainty that proved tactically paralyzing. The transformation was documented in unit-after-action reports and personal accounts. Crews that had previously advanced confidently against American armor now hesitated, requesting reconnaissance confirmation before engaging. Tank commanders who had once sought out American armor to increase their kill counts now avoided contact unless absolutely necessary. Hauptmann Klaus Behrenfänger, commanding a company of Panzer IVs, wrote in his war diary, "The men ask questions I cannot answer. Is that a Sherman or something else? Can we penetrate its armor? Will our shots merely announce our position? The confidence that sustained us through 3 years of combat is cracking." The kill ratios tell part of the story, though statistical analysis is complicated by the limited number of Pershings in combat. In documented engagements where Pershings faced German armor, American tanks achieved favorable exchange rates. More significantly, German crews began reporting successful engagements with Pershings that were actually Shermans, indicating that fear was affecting identification and tactical decision-making. What mattered more was the strategic uncertainty. German crews couldn't distinguish Pershings from Shermans at distance, creating hesitation in every engagement. Tank commanders found themselves in impossible tactical situations: engage immediately and risk facing a Pershing, or delay to confirm target identification and lose first shot advantage. The psychological impact was compounded by German crew rotation policies. Veteran crews, who might have adapted to the new threat, were being rotated to the Eastern Front, replaced by inexperienced crews who lacked the confidence to engage American armor effectively. New crews arrived with knowledge of Pershing capabilities, making them inherently cautious in ways that veteran crews had never been. Production mathematics were even more significant than combat statistics. While Germany struggled to produce 100 tanks per month by early 1945 due to material shortages and Allied bombing, American factories had produced 2,222 M26 tanks by war's end. Fisher Body's Grand Blanc arsenal alone completed 1,739 units, demonstrating production capacity that dwarfed entire German monthly output. German crews who learned about these production rates through interrogations of captured American personnel or found documents realized they weren't just facing a technically capable opponent. They were facing one that could replace losses at rates Germany couldn't match, even at peak production capacity. A single American factory could produce more heavy tanks in a month than Germany produced in a quarter. The capture of damaged Pershing components and examination of knocked-out vehicles provided German engineers and tank crews with their first close look at American heavy tank engineering. What they discovered challenged every assumption about American industrial and design capabilities. creating demoralization that extended far beyond tactical considerations. The cast turret was a single piece weighing 8.5 tons, requiring manufacturing capabilities Germany had never developed for such large components. German tank turrets were welded assemblies of rolled steel plates, a time-consuming process that created potential weak points at joints. American casting techniques produced turrets without seams, offering superior protection while reducing production time. Technical examination revealed the sophistication of American metallurgy. The armor steel matched German quality standards while being produced at much higher rates. Chemical analysis showed carbon content and heat treatment processes that German engineers had assumed were impossible to achieve in mass production. The Americans had somehow solved the quality versus quantity dilemma that had constrained German production. The Ford GAF V8 engine produced 500 horsepower while maintaining reliability that German engines couldn't achieve. German tank engines were engineering marvels, but required extensive maintenance and skilled mechanics. The American engine could operate for extended periods with minimal service, reflecting different design philosophies: German perfectionism versus American practicality. The transmission included advanced features that seemed impossibly complex, yet functioned smoothly under combat conditions. The automatic transmission allowed crew members with minimal training to operate the tank effectively, while German manual transmissions required extensive driver training and experience. This difference reflected broader American advantages in crew training time and replacement personnel availability. German technical officers reported that the Pershing wasn't simply an upgraded Sherman. Every component represented advanced engineering that suggested American industrial capability had evolved beyond German expectations. The gun stabilization system allowed accurate fire while moving, something German Tigers couldn't achieve despite their sophisticated sighting systems. The power traverse system could rotate the turret 360 degrees in 15 seconds, comparable to German systems but more reliable. The optical equipment equaled German quality, challenging assumptions about American precision manufacturing. Most disturbing to German engineers, American optics were being mass-produced, while German optics required individual craftsman assembly. The interior examination revealed details that particularly affected German crew morale. The fighting compartment was spacious compared to cramped German tanks, with better crew ergonomics and more comfortable seating. American tanks included amenities that German designers had eliminated to save weight and space: padded surfaces, interior lighting, even holders for personal equipment. The ammunition storage included wet stowage systems designed to prevent catastrophic fires, a feature German tanks desperately needed but lacked due to space constraints. American designers had solved problems that German engineers hadn't even acknowledged, suggesting superior understanding of crew survivability requirements. Even small details revealed American attention to practical concerns German design had ignored. The inclusion of infantry telephones on the rear hull allowed foot soldiers to communicate directly with tank crews, facilitating combined arms operations. German tanks lacked this feature, forcing infantry and armor to coordinate through radio communications or visual signals. The knowledge of American heavy tank capability spread through the Panzerwaffe rapidly, affecting morale that had already been weakened by constant retreat and material shortages. But the impact went beyond tactical concerns. It created a fundamental crisis in the ideological foundation of German resistance. Tank crews who had maintained their fighting spirit despite overwhelming odds now faced a different reality. The Americans had eliminated their last technological advantage, but more significantly, they had done so while maintaining the democratic and industrial system that Nazi propaganda had claimed was inherently inferior. German tactical doctrine had been built on the assumption of technical superiority, compensating for numerical inferiority. Defensive positions were chosen based on Tigers and Panthers being able to engage American armor at ranges where return fire was ineffective. Offensive operations assumed German heavy tanks could punch through American positions with acceptable losses. Both fundamental assumptions were now questionable. The psychological impact was reflected in increasing reports of mechanical breakdowns that resulted in tank abandonment. Crews who would previously have attempted field repairs under fire now declared vehicles irreparable at the first mechanical issue. Tank recovery personnel reported finding abandoned German tanks with minor problems: loose tracks, empty fuel tanks, thrown treads. that crews would have routinely fixed weeks earlier. This behavioral change reflected deeper psychological shifts. Crews were no longer fighting for victory, but for survival, and survival calculations didn't justify risking lives for repairable tanks. The transition from offense-minded to survival-minded thinking accelerated German defensive collapse across the Western Front. More profoundly, the Pershings' existence challenged Nazi racial ideology that had sustained German fighting spirit. SS tank crews, selected for ideological reliability, found themselves confronting evidence that contradicted fundamental beliefs about racial superiority. If Americans, described in Nazi propaganda as a mongrel race lacking German organization and technical skill, could build superior weapons, what did that imply about racial theories? The cognitive dissonance was particularly severe for Waffen-SS tank crews who had internalized Nazi ideology as justification for their sacrifices. These men had accepted tremendous hardships and losses because they believed they were fighting for a superior civilization. The Pershings' technical sophistication suggested that American civilization might actually be more advanced than German. As American forces pushed toward the Rhine in late March 1945, German tank crews found themselves in an impossible psychological position. They were ordered to hold bridgeheads against American advances, but they no longer knew what they were facing. Every engagement became a lethal gamble with odds that couldn't be calculated. The pattern repeated across the Western Front with devastating consistency. German tanks that had once stood their ground now withdrew at first contact with American armor. Defensive positions that should have held for days collapsed in hours. Tank crews reported mechanical failures at unprecedented rates, often abandoning repairable vehicles rather than risking engagement with potentially superior American tanks. April 1945 saw the complete breakdown of German armored resistance in the West. Units that still possessed operational tanks often refused to engage American armor without guarantee that no Pershings were present. Since no such guarantee was possible, many units essentially ceased offensive operations and adopted purely defensive postures that accelerated Allied advances. The battle for Dessau on April 21st to 24th exemplified the new reality. German defenders, despite having operational Panthers and remaining Tiger IIs, adopted purely defensive positions and avoided engaging American armor at range. The American attack, which included several Pershings among regular Shermans, met minimal organized resistance as German crews chose withdrawal over engagement with potentially superior American tanks. Individual accounts from this period reveal the depth of German demoralization. Tank aces who had accumulated dozens of kills abandoned their vehicles rather than face possible Pershings. Hauptmann Otto Carius, one of Germany's highest-scoring tank commanders with over 150 kills, later wrote, "When we learned Americans had tanks that could match our Tigers, something died inside us. The certainty that had sustained us through the worst battles was gone. The mere rumor of Pershings in a sector could cause German armored units to withdraw without contact." Intelligence reports from this period show German units reporting Pershing sightings in areas where no American heavy tanks operated, indicating that fear was affecting observation and tactical decision-making at fundamental levels. The Panzerwaffe that had conquered France and nearly defeated the Soviet Union had lost its will to fight. The psychological transformation was complete. From hunters to hunted, from confident to desperate, from superior to potentially inferior. The transition occurred in less than 2 months, from first Pershing combat encounters in late February to general German surrender in early May.